Oh, there. Is that okay? Good evening. Oh, all right. Okay. Good evening again. I'm Alex Talk, the director of the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership. The Thompson Center has been delighted to be able to bring you tonight's event, along with our partners, the McCain Institute and the Wisconsin Institute for Citizenship and Civil Dialogue. Um, Thank you to our partners for helping make this possible, and to our truly inspiring set of speakers tonight, to the staff of the Thompson Center, and most of all to all of you for being here tonight. Let me briefly explain what the Thompson Center is for those of you who may be unfamiliar. The Thompson Center was established to follow in the footsteps of Governor Tommy Thompson, who proudly worked with colleagues on both sides of the aisle to advance the public good. The Thompson Center seeks to carry on Governor Thompson's legacy by fostering effective public leadership and informing current and future leaders through public events such as this one, funding research and scholarships, and conducting other activities across the UW system. The political scientist Samuel Huntington popularized the idea that democracy comes in waves, noting that previous waves had been followed by reverse waves of democratic breakdown. In 1991, Huntington argued that the period from the mid-1970s until then marked the third and largest wave of democratization. As with previous waves, and as Huntington could not have truly known at the time, this wave seems to have been followed by a reverse wave. By almost all accounts, democracy has been in retreat around the world over the last 2 decades. The measures of democracy used by scholars such as VDEM, Polity, Freedom House, all show this trend against democracy. Of course, this does not mean that there have been no cases where democracy has advanced, but that for every step forward, we have seen 2 steps back. Is another wave of democracy coming? I hope so. I remember from my youth the peak of the third wave when the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union collapsed, leading to a litany of new democracies in the former Soviet bloc. Most importantly to me personally, in Estonia, where my grandfather had been born nearly 100 years earlier. Estonia has remained to this day a functioning liberal democracy. This leaves the question of what causes the apparent tendency of democracy to spread in waves. One reason is, of course, shared circumstances. But I think another is that ideas and events can be contagious. The success of a movement in one place can inspire future movements and future leaders there and in neighboring places. Democracy is inherently a system that depends on the public, on all of us, to be sustained. With a national election merely a week away, we are at a moment where we have clear avenues to participate and help sustain our democracy. But as our waves of democracy suggest, strengthening our own democracy can have global implications, and global efforts to strengthen democracies elsewhere and build democracies may have implications for us. Our speakers tonight are at the forefront of the fight for democratic and human rights around the world. Their experiences can be cautionary, but also inspiring. Perhaps they can show us how a new wave begins. It's my pleasure now to introduce Scott Nemeth. Scott serves as the Assistant Director of Leadership Programs at the McCain Institute at Arizona State. In this role, he leads the global leadership team and helps prepare today's leaders to lead tomorrow's challenges through the Institute's McCain Global Leaders Program. He also leads efforts to expand the Institute's leadership programs and manages both the MGL Global Advisory Council and the McCain Leadership Alumni Network. Prior to the McCain Institute, Scott served as a legislative strengthening specialist at the International Republican Institute and as a legislative aide to Congressman David Vallado. Please welcome Scott Nemeth.
Alex, thank you so much for that introduction. The McCain Institute is honored to have partnered with the Thompson Center and the University of Wisconsin. You all have been incredible hosts, and I've really enjoyed getting to know you and Ruth and the incredible team here at the Thompson Center. We're excited to be here in Madison tonight to share the work of the McCain Institute, but more importantly, the work of the incredible leaders that have joined us here from around the world. It's an important time to be in Wisconsin, and I don't have to be the one to tell you. It is a pivotal moment when it comes to democracy, civic engagement, and really the future of our own government at home here in the United States, as well as abroad in many places around the world. But folks, I gotta be honest with you. Right now, the world is in a very dangerous place, especially when it comes to freedom, human rights, and democracy. As we gather here today, the world is at a point it really hasn't been before. A point where we now call into question what the global community will look like for future generations. Instead of being focused on how great future generations can be and how much progress we can make, we instead focus on fear and anxiety that the world may not be in a better place 5, 10, 20 years down the road. And I really promise you, I'm not here to scare you, but it is a dire point in time. A time where there are unprecedented levels of turmoil, humanitarian crises on scales we have never seen before, distrust in government and democratic norms that's fueled by extremist ideologies and misinformation, and authoritarians in places like China and Russia and Iran, whose influence has spread from regional to global and has undermined the free will of millions of people around the world, even here at home in the United States. And I know what I'm saying to you is not new. You turn on the news and you see a new tragedy, you get a push alert on your phone that shares of yet another crisis. You scroll social media and you feel hopeless and tired because you are inundated with misinformation, conspiracy theories, and pretty much anything but positivity and hope. And again, I'm not trying to scare you or add to that hopeless feeling. And once you meet and hear from our panelists in just a second, our intention is that you will walk away knowing there are some really incredible people risking a whole heck of a lot to try to make things better. And we all have the ability, like Alex said, to make positive change in the world around us and do something about what scares us and keeps us so uncertain about the future. But we are in a difficult spot, not just here at home, but around the world. The UN currently estimates almost 800 million people face food insecurity. The Geneva Academy is tracking 110 armed conflicts globally. The UN Development Program estimates that less than 1% of women live in countries with high levels of gender parity and empowerment. According to the World Bank, 2.4 billion women do not have the same rights as men in the eyes of the law. Freedom House, with their Freedom of the World report, noted that for the 18th consecutive year, freedom has declined. In the last year alone, 1/5 of the world saw their freedom decline at unprecedented levels. Armed conflict and flawed elections happen in every corner of the world, and authoritarians like Maduro, Putin, Xi Jinping, and the Ayatollah Khamenei are exploiting this on a daily basis to further sow chaos, humanitarian challenges, and undermine the sovereignty of free nations. We know about Putin's unjust and criminal war in Ukraine. We know the unimaginable humanitarian crisis and conflict in the Middle East. And we know of the threats to allies like Taiwan coming from China, but there is so much more going on. In Venezuela, just recently, a strong-armed dictator corrupted elections to remain in power. In Sudan, famine levels are being reached as food aid is seized by militias during a civil war. In Burma, young activists are jailed and tortured for pushing back against a brutal military regime. In Afghanistan, the Taliban runs rampant, kidnapping, torturing, and inflicting sexual violence on the family members of pro-democracy leaders and former military members. In Kenya, protesters were shot for advocating for fair financial policy. And in Central America, corruption runs so deep that people are forced to leave their homes in search of food, healthcare, and education. And just in the last few weeks alone, North Korea has sent troops to prepare to fight in Ukraine, China has conducted countless military exercises off the coast of Taiwan, and missiles are being lobbed back and forth in the Middle East. All of this is really exhausting, and it's overwhelming. And this list could have gone on and on about what is happening in the world around us. But I promise you there is hope, and there is a lot each of us can do to help turn the tide in this unprecedented time. You see, at the McCain Institute, we believe there is still a chance to push back on this dark wave of authoritarianism, and that the defense of democracy, freedom, and human rights, it is not hopeless. We carry on the late Senator John McCain's legacy and ethos of fighting for just causes and are working at home and abroad to ensure that future generations experience freedom and the right to determine their own path. At the McCain Institute, I'm really lucky to be able to work on these issues alongside incredible leaders from around the world. Leaders who are risking it all in the defense of human rights and democracy. Some of these leaders are here tonight to share their story, to share their work, to share the challenges they face. And they're here to share why it is important that we all are involved and that we do not take the democratic process for granted. They're here to share why we need to engage as the United States in the global community around us. As you listen tonight and as you get the opportunity to ask your own questions, I urge you to think about their stories, their work, and their purpose, and how it might resonate with you, and to reflect on the role you play in the world around you. It is now my pleasure to introduce the panelists who are truly standing on a day-to-day basis on the front lines of defending democracy and human rights. Our first panelist is Sunny Chang, who is a globally recognized democracy activist from Hong Kong who has risked his own personal freedom to push back on authoritarianism. We have Hajar Issa from Sudan, who is pushing back against insurmountable challenges, including famine and genocide, to fight for her country. Dr. Maria Levchenko is from Ukraine. She's a global expert in peace and reconciliation who has been forced to leave her home due to Putin's war and is currently pushing back to ensure that her home simply has the right to exist. And finally, we have Tukudzwa Gadzore from Zimbabwe, who has faced imprisonment and torture to become the country's youngest member of parliament and counter decades of dictator rule. Please join me in welcoming these incredible panelists this evening. So Sunny, I would like to start with you and have you share a little bit about your home country of Hong Kong and your work and why it's so important.
Hi everyone, my name is Sunny. Very happy to be here. So I now live in DC, and the reason for that is because my home country, Hong Kong, has been arresting a lot of dissidents as young as me throughout the 2 to 3 years before, and then there's now more than 2,000 political prisoners right now in Hong Kong. So in case you don't know where is Hong Kong, Hong Kong is now part of China, but before that, it's actually a British colony before 1997. So in Hong Kong, we used to enjoy a lot of freedom, autonomy, and then we also have very different political system and legal system. For example, we adopt the British common law system, try to differentiate us, Hong Kong, with our counterpart in mainland China. So, however, after 1997, when the British hand over Hong Kong back to China, many things changed, especially after the rise of Xi Jinping, the current leader of China. We witness a lot of freedom is being limited. Hong Kong people were promised that we could have universal suffrage. We could elect our own city leader by one person, one vote. However, Beijing broke the promise in 2014, and then I was a student activist back then, and then I tried to stood up and fight for democracy. There was like 1 million Hong Kong people marching on the street, and then in 2019, we even had 2 million Hong Kong people march on the street. And then I helped organize many college students, to join the class boycott or try to do a lot of international advocacy. So I led a student group representing more than 100,000 Hong Kong college students and all the university student unions. So in 2019, that was my first time traveling to DC. The reason for that is because I have to testify before the Congress to talk about the story of Hong Kong people and what happened right now, the human rights abuses in China. And then, however, I mean, the things really went south. And then Beijing government decided not to compromise, first of all, and then trying to increase the crackdown. So I have to flee. Many friends of mine are now political prisoners now in Hong Kong. So I have the privilege and really the luxury to enjoy the freedom here in the United States to continue my advocacy and continue to inform policymakers in DC about the threat of China, not just in Asia, but globally speaking. So yeah, I really look forward to today's amazing panel, and I hope I can contribute more and eager to hear more from you. I will stop here first.
Thank you so much, Sunny. Hajar, can you share a bit about Sudan and your journey?
Hi, everyone. So I'm Hajar Issa from Sudan, and Sudan is a country that is currently going through a genocide that has been going on for almost 2 years, which pretty much the world do not speak of. And I think this is now part of, I see as a mission to bring attention to what's happening in Sudan. I grew up in the capital city, but my parents originally come from Darfur. To those who do not know where Darfur is in the west region of Sudan. It was one of the richest parts in the country until the dictator Bashir, whom we successfully forced to withdraw his dictatorship in the country from 2019 to 2022, when one of the biggest demonstrations took place in Sudan. And I had the privilege, let's say, to also be a part of those demonstrations. But that did not pretty much take a good turn, because then it put my life in danger. It put my family's life in danger, because they pretty much knew who was participating, who started it, who did what, and who did not. I was pretty much in a situation that I did not want to put my family through it, but it just happened. But it did not make me give up on my mission on fighting for human rights, fighting for democracy, because Sudan is a country that I see it with the dictatorship that it has been going through since 1993. That was when I was born, because of Bashir being the president, and also pretty much resonates with my colleague here that UK, of course, was colonizing Sudan, but then they also had a very kind of tactic that they followed in Sudan before splitting it into two parts, taking over the north and the other, and Egypt part, like taking over the south, and then it led to the separation of the south after that. So yeah, I pretty much find myself in the situation that this is now the right for me to fight for my people, like not only in Sudan, but also like in Darfur, because just having the chance, like to speak out, to be vocal, to say what the others cannot say, I see this is the situation that we need to work on at the moment. So I think I'll also leave it right here.
Thank you so much. Maria, I met you about a day after the full-scale invasion began over Zoom, and you had just evacuated across the border. Can you share a little bit about the current state of affairs in Ukraine and your experience?
Yeah, thank you, Scott, for the question. I'm sure many of you are following up and you know what is happening in Ukraine, because we have been very much on the world agenda after a full-scale invasion happened. And the war is still going on every single day. I just came back from Ukraine last week, and I had to take shelter during the night because of the air alert. But what's going on in Ukraine right now, and here I just want to take a step back and say that we do not call it Ukraine-Russia war or Russian war, because we did not start this war. We were attacked by the Russia, so we prefer to call it Russian aggression against Ukraine. And at this moment of time, we have 18% of our territory occupied by Russians. And that feels like your neighbor comes to your house and tells you, you know what, you're not allowed to speak your language anymore. You're not allowed to have your culture anymore. And I'm actually going to take your wife and rape your kids. How do you feel about that? So this is the condition that we have right now, this moment in Ukraine. And I have been working in the civil society field since 2014, when Russia has annexed Crimea and this whole war just started to unfold. And it always has not been an easy, because my field, peace building field and conflict resolution field, is something that we usually take aside. We do not pay attention to it. We feel like, oh, Ukrainians are so united. They're so having such a high level of solidarity among each other. But this is the work where we have to work with the people directly, because people are very much traumatized and people have a lot of PTSD. So allowing them to have a space to be united and create the connections is something that I'm working on right now. And yes, I met Scott just 2 days after evacuating Ukraine. I was based in Kiev when the full-scale invasion happened, and I woke up like many of my other compatriots from the sounds of the rocket hitting the capital of the country. And since that time, for the last 2 years, I've been traveling back and forth, trying to forge the connections, to build the networks of the people, preparing for the day when the victory will come. And at this moment, I'll also stop.
That day will most certainly come. Takudzwa, can you share a bit, for those that don't know, about the decades of dictator rule in Zimbabwe and the work that you're doing to counter that?
Thank you so much, Scott. So my name is Takudzwa. As said, I'm a member of parliament. And just to share a brief background about the contextual framework of Zimbabwe, particularly, you know very well that we had President Robert Gabriel Mugabe, who was in, and in 2017, there was a military coup, which came through with President Emerson Mnangagwa taking forth the reins of power. And people had hope that the new dispensation was supposed to change the government and positively impact the livelihoods of the people. But sadly, it did not manage to. People had hopes that we were going to have effective policies. People had hopes that we were going to voice out, but this did not happen from the days of the military coup. And as a member of parliament, my work is enshrined within the Constitution of Zimbabwe, particularly Section 119, to particularly look at three things. That's the representative function, the oversight function, and also the legislative function. But before that, I've been a student activist representing the biggest students movement in Zimbabwe, particularly with a membership of around 300 to 400,000 students, and being on the front line of a students movement with a vision to create an inclusive and democratic Zimbabwe with students as integral stakeholders, where student concerns are heard and academic freedoms upheld and promoted. I've been at the center to lead this movement, but it did come through with various persecutions and victimization. I've been arrested around 13 times, but only charged 5 times. I do have 4 pending cases before the courts of law right now as I speak, and I have been abducted around 4 times. This is a sad story that speaks through to how democracy is being suffocated on a daily basis. Those who stand up to speak their mind are people who are subjected to unjust arrest, are people who are abducted and tortured, and are people who do not get the same treatment that they should, as guaranteed on Supreme document, which is the Constitution. I just shared a post just the past weeks sharing about how my own passport was taken for 4 years. From the year 2020 up until 2024, I had no passport. It was only released early 2024. Around 25 applications were made to the High Court to release the passport, but they were all denied. Only when another application was made, surprisingly, we thought it was going to fail, but successfully it passed. But at that time, I'd also applied to be part of the McCain Global Leaders Program, and I had successfully managed to pass the interview process and become one of the 22 members, global members around the world, and which I think is an incredible opportunity for me to be a voice of those who are in Zimbabwe, which is a country with a population of around 15, 16 million, according to the last census that we had. in 2022. But all this, I think, it's fuel that we as young people hold on, and we carry the burden on our shoulders to say if we are not going to fight for democracy to thrive, then we are simply going to be responsible for what the next generation is going to face. So it's a staircase of democracy. Once we climb the first step, we climb the other, but we have a full hope that no matter how small our contribution might be, it's not about the blood which will be forgotten. It's about the battle which will be remembered. So we will continuously fight. We will continuously speak through our minds, regardless of how bad the situation is, regardless of how we might have an oppressor who sits and resides as president, trying as much to make sure that he suffocates the democratic atmosphere in Zimbabwe. Thank you.
I'm going to go right back to you because I think for most of us in this room, after our first unjust arrest, our first aspect of being tortured would probably make us not want to continue the work. And I think there's even fewer folks who would sign up to do this work. Just being here tonight on stage with us puts you at risk when you go back home in a couple of days. Why do you do this?
I think the moment you sign up to become a human rights defender in an authoritarian regime, three things should disappear like a moth drawn to the flames: the fear of prison, the fear of the hospital, and the fear of the cemetery. Sadly, this is the reality that we hold on to. I've been in hospital numerous times. I've been in prison numerous times. From the age of 20, I remember vividly my mother crying and me telling her that she's not supposed to come and visit myself at the prison because she was also a danger. I remember moving out at the age of 21 because I could not stay with my family. It would endanger my siblings, it would endanger my relatives, but I had to take on this course and this role. But most importantly, what fuels my zeal and determination for us to see a free world, for us to see a world in which people can be respected, is particularly because we would rather die at least trying to stand up than to spend the rest of our lives kneeling down. We would rather make a human effort to what we want to see coming up as the best world in which people can echo their minds, can share their minds. The best idea in the end of the day should thrive. This is something that happens in other countries, and we don't enjoy such a benefit. And just because of that, I think I have a responsibility as a young person, a responsibility as a human rights defender to wake up and focus particularly on making sure that we create those avenues, we fight on, even though it might be painful, but ours is not to be seen as victims, it's to be seen as victors, is to register all those small victories that we have, for us to have an appealing struggle, for other young people to join in, for even the elderly, because I believe that for democracy to thrive, it's an intergenerational cause. It does not only take the young people to fight, but it also takes the elderly. But once we manage to get that intergenerational appeal, and once we manage to make sure that everyone understands, particularly the reason why we are fighting, from an ideological orientation that understands that we are not only doing this for ourselves, but for the generation to come, and even for the dead who fought for human rights, who fought for the liberation struggle in Zimbabwe, who would have wanted to see a free society in which people can speak through their minds, can contribute to the economy, can own businesses, and can contribute in society in whatever way that they can. And this is what fuels my zeal and determination each time I wake up.
Thank you.
Sunny, I'm going to turn to you. You grew up in Hong Kong at a time where it was much more free, where it was more of a democracy. And at a certain point in your life, it started to trend the other way towards being more like mainland China. I'm sure that you had an option in your mind. Do I go with it or do I push back? What made you push back?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, because in Hong Kong is actually a very developed city. It's very much unlike New York and London, and then many people are very wealthy, not me, but then so, but I mean, people grew up like trying to be a lawyer or doctor, and then yeah, I mean, the economic standard, the life being is so good in a way that people might, especially the elderly generation, your parents might really ask you a question. So why do you try to stand up for democracy? And I mean, just have a job, and then CCP is not something you want to mess up with. They are terrible, and then they kill people, and then so yeah, I mean, why would you sacrifice so much to do that? But my answer to that is, if you love the country, if you love the birthplace you were born, and then I think this is like the obligation for you to do that. If you don't try to defend the democracy, if you don't try to sustain the value and to protect the value you cherish, and then you will lose. So it's kind of like our generation thing to have a consensus that we have to preserve the democracy and autonomy of Hong Kong before it's too late. And yes, many people sacrifice a lot. For me, my parents, my family is still in Hong Kong, and I'm now in exile. I could not meet them. My cat accompanied me for like 18 years. And then when I left Hong Kong, I could just say goodbye to my cat and couldn't perhaps like accompany her anymore. And this is kind of the sacrifice you have to undergo, have to take. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's worth doing that because we see many people see the beauty of human nature that we want to fight for our dignity. We want to say no to autocrat that they cannot just deprive the basic human rights of individual just as simple as that. So for me, I have to fight against the autocracy, especially many friends of mine are now in prison. So I have to fight for them. I have to fight for the city I love, and I have to fight for the value I cherish. So this is why I want to join in the fight, even though I know that there will be sacrifices.
Follow up to that is what would happen to you if you flew to Hong Kong tomorrow and landed?
Well, despite I might look young, and then, but I actually very notoriously have several charges on me. I'm now wanted by the Hong Kong government. Yes, too many charges, and then like accusing me like subverting the regime just because I fight for democracy, and then they also accuse me like joining illegal assembly because I try to commemorate the June 4th massacre victim that happened and sacrificed their lives in 1989 Tiananmen massacre. So I just try to peacefully held a candlelight vigil, and then the Hong Kong government arrest me and accuse me for like holding illegal assembly. This is really absurd. So yeah, and I might face more than 10 years sentence or even to life sentence. And many friends of mine are now also facing the consequences being put facing the verdict of life sentence. So if I go back to Hong Kong tomorrow, unfortunately, I might not be able to come back in my lifetime.
Thank you for sharing that. Hajar, in your opening remarks, you talked about the risks that you've taken and the consequences for your family. Why do you think it's so important that you continue this fight against authoritarianism, even when your own family may be skeptical of that cause?
Yeah, I think pretty much since you mentioned that my family is very much skeptical about it. There's a story that I tell all the time that they don't even watch the news. Like I'm the one that wakes up every day in the morning. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I want to see what's happening on BBC and the kind of news around the world. And now more specifically, putting it back into perspective on what's the genocide that's happening. And I still have actually my brother and my father still living in Sudan right now, and I see them also in that danger. But again, I see like it's my responsibility, probably not only for them, but for also the other generations that are really trying to make a change. And there's of course there's a lot of fear that we go through. There's a lot of let's say challenges, right? But there's also like a kind of code that I go through that right now I think it's the time for us to keep on fighting like it may not be with anger, but rather with actions. And I think these are the little actions that we take, probably that makes us wake up every day. And I see it as the fuel that keep on pushing us forward and trying to make the change and tackle, because we don't want to give up, right? We don't want to give authoritarian regimes like the power, because I see right now, for example, even the context of Africa, all the dictators in the continent are uniting, and that makes them very powerful. And I think like having us, for example, in such a setting where we can see people fighting for democracy, people who are willing to listen to fight for democracy as well, is also kind of the power that we need. So this is what I see the most, and I think it's very important for us to keep fighting. One hand cannot clap, but I think two hands together can make a change for sure. So yeah, I think even though my family is in danger, but I think the fight should go on, and this is our purpose in life.
Thank you. Maria, you work not just in Ukraine, but around the world on dialogue centered around peace building and reconciliation. When you think about that, what are some of the challenges that come into play when you're having those conversations?
I think the biggest challenge that I would see in my work is the ability to forgive, because it's really hard to forgive the atrocities and the crimes that you have been witness to. And I feel like I also have seen a lot of trauma, and I mentioned that before, in the people that I work with, especially in Ukraine, especially in the countries like Ethiopia or Chad, where I have been present and working with the refugees as well. The trauma of witnessing something stays with you forever. And to be honest, I'm also traumatized. Yesterday, I arrived at the hotel, and my hotel room has 2 beds. So I was looking at the bed, and I was thinking to myself, this one is really close to the window, so I don't want to take that one in case the drone comes. I mean, I'm not here where the drones are coming, but that's the thing that stays with me, just because I travel to Ukraine quite often, just because I lived in Ukraine during the invasion, just because I have family and friends that I check on every single day just to make sure that they are all right and fine. This is a trauma that I carry with me, and all the other people that I work with carry on. So this ability to forgive, it's very hard. And we have been in Vietnam. I remember it was the McCain Institute, and the question that I asked to Vietnamese former soldier was actually, how did you learn how to forgive? And I feel like it takes generation to do that. So unfortunately, I'll have a lot of work for the next 40 years in my field.
Thank you. Takudzwa, you've shared your experience in Zimbabwe. Now you're an elected member of parliament. You do have a voice, even though it is in the minority when it comes going against the current leading party. What are the challenges that you see on a day-to-day basis for democracy breaking through in Zimbabwe?
I think my main responsibility as a member of parliament is to cover the colossal gap which exists between public policy and public opinion. This is quite a hard task, considering how the world is suffering from a mistrust of institutional politics. It's not only in Africa, but if you are to look in several continents, parliament has lost most of its trust from the people who entrusted to serve. But as a member of parliament in Zimbabwe, and also the vice chairperson of the Parliamentary Youth Caucus, I do have an agenda that I had set up for myself to say these are the 5 things that I will look unto to execute. And it's called the 5 Ps agenda. Particularly, it looks around pushing forward to have sustainable youth inclusion. Number 2, it looks around pushing to have a pragmatic education system anchored on skills development. It looks around preserving progressive laws and repealing those retrogressive. It also looks around promoting empowerment and employment, but also pioneering a fight against drug and substance abuse, which is a cancer that is affecting most of the young people where I come from. But looking at the challenges, particularly, you would look at ageism. There are people who believe that once you're young, there are no ideas that can come out of it. And African societies, most of them believe that young people might not have a chance or a word to contribute when it comes to policy matters. So you suffer from that. But also, regardless of all this, being a member of parliament does not take away the jacket I wear as a human rights defender. On the 1st of November, just last year, I woke up trying to get to the parliament, but at the gate, I saw people who were holding AK-47 guns simply because I had voiced out against the regime when I was in parliament. So already these are challenges that you face as a parliamentarian. Do you need to shut up when you see these evils prevail? Do you need to take a step back? But this is not you. And you are more dangerous to them even when you pose a threat and not when you make it. So the moment you say, I'm taking a step back, they probably think you are organizing to come back. So they will still attack you. The moment you say, I'm fighting on, they will still attack you. So you realize that there is only one thing that I need to do is to fight on. And these challenges come through from an area where we have a hard-hitting and shambolic economy. So no matter how you have ideas that you want, and they should prevail. Tomorrow, the rate of the new currency which was introduced is probably 1 is to 40 ZiG. We have a currency that's called the Zimbabwe gold, a currency that was introduced with the government claiming that is being backed by gold. And it's $1 is to 40 ZiG right now as we speak. But when they introduced it, they claimed it's going to be 1:1. So it simply means that no matter how many brilliant initiatives you might come with, the economy is also a setback in terms of what you want to implement. You also have youth who are in the remote areas. The world is functioning in such a way that if we don't cope up with the developments globally, we might lose track of many conversations. And as a young person, I look around at how, number one, technological transformations are happening. Number two, climate change being a critical conversation we should engage in. Number three, look at, conversations around the chat GTP, quantum computing, conversations around 3D printing, conversations around the global finance system, trade and investment. These are conversations that in Africa, if we are to ignore, then we are going to wake up one day and still be affected. You know, the scourge and the pandemic of climate change, how it's affecting the whole world. And we are not excluded from the problem of climate change. So this is a challenge when you look at how backward our policies are, and you want to come in with a mind that is more forward-looking and a mind that carries forth leadership that is not only reactionary but proactive in terms of delivering real solutions and real change. But regardless of those, I believe we should step up and we must step up.
Thank you. Sonny, I want to ask this question. As we just kind of discussed, you kind of saw your country move from a little bit of a democracy to authoritarianism. What are some of the warning signs you saw that this transition was happening?
Well, that's a very great question. I would say two things. First of all, is that since Xi Jinping, the current Chinese leader, took over the office in 2012, many people might suspect, because they didn't know back then the background of Xi Jinping very well, they might think he's actually can be a very reformer and trying to bring in some changes to the Chinese Communist Party and bring in some democracy reshuffle. But that's not the case, because in 2014, that I think that is the first time Beijing government violates the promise, because we were told, and that was actually in our basic law, which is like our city constitution, mini constitution. In our constitution, that mentioned the Hong Kong leader should be elected by Hong Kong people, one person, one vote. But in 2014, Xi Jinping violates. They override, the Beijing government just override the whole Hong Kong constitution and say that, no, I mean, we are not trying to give you a real universal suffrage, and then you cannot elect your own city leader by the universal standard of democracy. We have to vet the city leader and candidate before you can elect your own one. So I think that is the watershed and tipping moment for us to recognize that actually Xi Jinping is a very assertive guy, and then he will actually bring more harms to the democracy and autonomous situation in Hong Kong compared to even other Chinese leaders back then. I think that is the first signal. And second, I will try to keep it short, is that I think when many people would like anticipate the economic success in China would bring in democratization in China, but that's not the case. If any one of you now study political science, you might hear the modernizational theory, because many people and scholars believe economic success can bring in political success and transform the political entity and regime to become a more democratic one. But that's not the case in China. And Xi Jinping trying to strengthen and tighten the control over Chinese economy even more. So you can see that innovation in China is very limited, and state enterprises will actually expel many medium and small sized companies. So when you see that happen, you can also tell that, well, the Chinese leader right now is not something we should be supporting, because he is not trying to bring in any meaningful economic reform. He's trying to care about and prioritize national security more than and his own power, personal power, rather than the well-being of the Chinese national and Hong Kong people. So I think that is the second sign.
A follow-up to that is, were you surprised at how quickly democratic norms eroded?
Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. I mean, so as mentioned, Hong Kong was once a very successful cosmopolitan in the world, but somehow we now have 2,000 political prisoners, and I have to be in exile, and and this kind of things just happened within 4 years. So we were surprised, we were shocked to see that how determined actually for a dictator like Xi Jinping to I mean for the sake of like maximizing his personal power, and then at the expense of Hong Kong people well-being and autonomy, he's just trying to wipe out the whole city of autonomy overnight. So yeah, I think we were shocked, we were surprised, and but the most disappointing thing is I think the international community is not ready. Um, for example, yeah, I mean, just perhaps, I mean, Maria can talk more about the Ukraine, but I think there are so many signals over the years, right? When perhaps Xi Jinping tried to make a move, when Putin tried to make a move, many people try to make a warning, try to warn about that. No one listens. I think many people are so complacent about the situation. They feel like, no, I mean, come on, the world is so interdependent. All the people care about economic interests. No one would really wage a war in 21st century against another big power. Come on, it's not the case. But I don't think that's the case. I think Xi Jinping is also ready to invade Taiwan one day in the near future. So yeah, I mean, the world is not ready, has not been ready for that. So this is something quite disappointing.
I think you really raise a valid point that the international community has been slow to respond on Hong Kong, on issues in Africa, but I think also with the threat from Putin. And Maria, I'd like to hear your take on that, and maybe what the international community can be doing to be more proactive to combat some of these challenges rather than be caught off guard by them.
Yeah, thank you, Sunny. It's actually something that was on my mind as well, and I absolutely agree. Those are the small steps that we are allowing dictators to take that actually lead to the collapse of the whole system. And it happens so fast, just before our eyes. It's really hard to even imagine. What I can say is, in Ukraine, we definitely do not want to be like Russia. This is why we are fighting. We do not want to be like autocracy, where people rights, people voices, they do not matter, and they can do whatever they want. And that's why our appeal to international community is just to look around, see what's happening in your country, try to be realistic, try to understand what steps each of you can take just to raise the awareness of those little steps that dictators take to take the power in their own hands, to be able to control. And for us, it's really important for Ukrainians also to be grateful. We are super grateful for international community to stepping up. And I hate saying that this is not enough, but this is not enough. We have seen that dictators work super well together. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, they're these bodies that stick together and actually support each other. But when it comes to Ukraine and us asking for long-range missiles, it takes 2 years for us to get them, and we are still not there. So I would say raising awareness, taking the steps, and just being mindful that the change can happen in front of your eyes sooner than you can imagine.
Hajar, I want to ask you, what are some of the tools in your toolkit to push back against authoritarians and build popular support in the face of somebody who is using strong arm tactics?
Oh, I would say definitely trying to get more of international involvement in this, because that is the only power that I think that we need right now, even though we might not recognize it as well in Sudan, but that's what we need, because again, it takes me back to that how all dictators are uniting. For example, in the case of Sudan, again, that UAE is one of the main issues why this is happening in Sudan. They are supporting like the RSF, Rapid Support Forces, with weapons, with everything they need in order to attack and kill civilians and kill the community. But I think one of those tools is like actually kind of being in the front line, talking to the international community about the facts, about what's happening and how they, not like giving probably not ideas, but also like seeing it on the possibilities and how they can definitely, for example, lend a helping hand to people. For example, humanitarian aid, that's a thing that we need. There is the sanctions, diplomatic sanctions on people who are working right now in diplomacy, because most of the diplomatic people who are working right now in Sudan and other countries are basically with the former government. So we're kind of like playing in a circle right here, but I think for me, basically focusing on countries that could support, that could help in tackling this issue, or even putting a limit to UAE, to Russia as well, since it's also involved in the situation. Yeah, these are the basic tools that I'm focusing on right now.
Do you think that social media helps you in your efforts or hurts you in your efforts when it comes to pushing back on dictators and authoritarians?
Pretty difficult to tell. Double-edged sword. You go online, you post everything, you're your target. You don't do it, people don't know. So we don't even know. We're just like kind of being in the middle in the situation that we want the whole world to hear it. We want everyone to know. But then once you press like that one button, Instagram, you post something about the dictators are uniting in Sudan. Okay, that's the target right now. You don't even know what's gonna happen. Like within 1 week, within 1 hour. These are the things. So, but I think the power of media is very powerful. That's why we do not need to be afraid to post. I think even though sometimes you might really double think about it, you're like, did I really do the right thing? But yeah, for the sake of the people, for the sake of freedom, for the sake of human rights, I think it's worth it, and that's what we really need to do.
Sunny, I know social media played a big role in gathering popular support for your cause in Hong Kong. What are your takes on how social media can or cannot help democracy movements?
Well, I agree. It's like a very double-edged sword because, for example, I mean, back in 2019, we protested. We did actually leverage a lot of like technology on Facebook, and we have our own Hong Kong version like Reddit. We call it LIHKG, but it's like the Hong Kong version of Reddit. And then people can actually go to the online forum and vote for the next action plan, like whether we should like occupy the street, whether we should launch a class boycott, and then people could really democratically and join the referendum online to decide the next move of the protest. And people can also freely distribute their own opinion, exchange opinions online. And this is something the Hong Kong government is very afraid of, because they are afraid of this kind of like dissemination of information. They are afraid of this kind of very candid deliberation among the public. But at the same time, I would say technology and social media, especially for China and Hong Kong, they are trying to use that, especially AI right now, to create a lot of deepfake technology and then disinformation, trying to amplify the echo chamber created by them, by Beijing, and then to shape the discourse environment, to let the national and let people to feel like, well, actually, we should not really care about democracy, and perhaps the US has a lot of problem, UK has a lot of problem, Australia has a lot of problem. So perhaps democracy is not that good, right? So why don't we just embrace the China model and stop fighting and just, I mean, try to earn some money and then you will forget about how bad Xi Jinping is. So that is their tactic. So yeah, I mean, depends on how you use that, and this deserves more discussion, definitely.
You raise a really good point. We're at a weird time in the world where people are questioning whether or not democracy is the right system of government. Takudzwa, you've been fighting your whole life for a democratic Zimbabwe. Why does democracy matter?
I think conversations around if democracy has lost its track can only be had if we have fully engaged and explored what democracy really is. And I think democracy is people power. Democracy has its values and principles. And these are centered around the respect of freedom of expression, the respect of people associating. There are political and civil rights that come with democracy. And I believe that if fully explored, then democracy remains a critical component of society that can enable economic prosperity. But with this being said, I believe that the full realization of democracy only comes when we have also realized that as the oppressed, we need to unite ourselves. The talk of dictators uniting is there and it's a reality. But the question is, are we uniting enough as people who are being oppressed? But most importantly, as people who might not be oppressed, but can contribute to change what's happening in other countries where oppression is operating full throttle. So global solidarity becomes a currency of nations who might not have the military might of states nor the economic might of corporates. Global solidarity becomes a currency of those who are fighting on the ground, be it in Uganda, be it in Zimbabwe, be it in Africa, for democracy there to thrive. And I think with the work that I particularly lead, if it's complemented by someone who also believes that it's a chance for people to voice in, then we are going to have a just and free world in which people can share what they believe in which people can speak through their mind. But the moment we are going to surrender democracy, then that's the moment we are going to see the end of the world and the end of free thinking, if not a stable economy, a stable society, and all.
Thank you. Maria, Ukrainians aren't just fighting for their sovereignty, they're fighting to be a democratic Ukraine. Why is that so important to Ukrainians?
It's important because it's our choice. It's our choice to decide our own fate. It's the ability of our communities to have our own destinies. And democracy for Ukraine is really important. It's basically our survival at this moment of time, because we have two options. We either stick with Russia, who is really trying to impose that we have been part of Soviet Empire, Russian Empire, and we have to continue being with them, or having a choice and freedom to go our own way. That's why for us it's the matter of survival, and that's why this fight is so important. But I just wanted to mention here that democracy is interconnected. It's not only Ukrainian democracy that we are fighting for. We are fighting for democracy of Poland, democracy of Baltic states, democracy of the United States in one way or another. Because with the blink of the eye, the model that Putin is trying to push in Ukraine can be pushed somewhere else as well. That's why I feel like by our own example and by the example of my colleagues here as well, we are really trying to show how it can be in the worst case scenario and how we are really trying to make it in the best case scenario for us.
Thank you. So we obviously have an election 1 week from today, and something that I think is on the ballot is how engaged the United States is in the global community. And Hajar, I want to ask you, why should somebody sitting here in this room in Madison, Wisconsin, care about what's going on in Sudan? And why should America have an interest in being active in the global community?
Pretty much, I think, depends on being the realm, let's say, of human rights, of human dignity, seeing everything that's happening. Historically, also in Sudan, the U.S. has taken many steps towards putting on sanctions on the former dictator. So I pretty much found it like very, very impactful at that time. It really helped the community in withdrawing the Bashir. And yeah, if like everybody really cares about human rights, then why not? Why not interfere? Why not take a chance that that could actually help another person's life change for the human rights, for the sake of human dignity? Um, uh, yeah, so I think that's pretty much what I can say about that.
Thank you. Sunny, you spend a lot of time, you're now, living in the United States just outside of Washington. You spend a lot of time on Capitol Hill engaging with lawmakers about the CCP and Xi Jinping. What is your pitch to those lawmakers on why Americans should care about what's going on the other side of the world?
I think two layers. First of all, in terms of U.S. interests, are very domestic. I mean, not just forget about the foreign policy for 1 second. I mean, U.S. has so many stakes in Asia. So I think whenever looking back to the history, if Asia is in stable environment and climate, you can see that actually the U.S. can be benefit from that a lot. However, if a lot of chaos happen in Asia, especially in East Asia, U.S. Usually lose a lot of interest in that. I mean, in terms of economic interest or even cultural interest, etc. And secondly, I would also say the reason why lawmakers, no matter Democrats or Republican on the Hill in D.C., they care about China issue is because they understand that the ultimate goal for Xi Jinping and China is trying to overtake the United States. They understand that the U.S. is a world leader. I personally feel like Xi Jinping and many Chinese leaders from the CCP are very jealous of U.S. They actually want to be American more than American themselves. They see that how massive U.S. power is in the world, how U.S. has been shaping the international norm and standard after the World War II, and China want to be involved in that. And that's why, however, when China has a very different agenda, ideology, and then the question is whether or not we should allow China to overtake the United States to become the world leader and try to make decision on behalf of the like 7 billion humankind, right? And I think the answer is no. So I think here in DC, a very bipartisan consensus is being formed to look into the China issue. But also at the same time, I do feel like American citizens should also understand why this is why the China issue matters to them. And I think the DC lawmakers should also deliver a better political message to American citizens about why China matters to the US.
Thank you. Initially, there was a lot of support for Ukraine. I think we all saw the flags in people's front yards, stickers on windows, lapel pins. It's become a major topic of debate in 2024 with the U.S. presidential elections as it relates to foreign assistance and how much the United States will continue to contribute to the Ukrainian fight against Putin. Why 3 years in, 2.5 years in now, should Americans still care and still support what's going on in Ukraine?
Because, of course, for us, United States is the example of democracy. And I do believe that every democratic state cares when the people are dying, cares when there is violation of human laws, when there are war crimes happening in front of our eyes, and there is something to be done, then this democratic state should done that. And the United States has been always a powerful example. We all know that that's the only country that can really stop the dictators like China, Russia, Iran, and many other its proxies from invading and doing the other horrible things to many other countries. That's why I feel like it should be on the agenda. It should continue being the agenda until we have the victory of Ukraine. I believe in that.
Thank you. Takudzwa, I think the United States has long had maybe a blind spot towards what goes on in Africa. Why should Americans care about what's going on in Zimbabwe and the rest of the continent?
Thank you so much for that question. My colleagues do mention much about interests be it economic and political, and I do concur. But my submission is more premised around how, in global politics and geopolitics, these interests will always be there. But we don't realize that humanity is what has hold us and make us glued together as a people. And once we ignore what separates us, we are never going to win any battle that is going to come. Not only as the United States of America, not only in Africa, in Asia, you name it. I submit that in this coming election, much interest should be put more to human rights defenders in Africa who are being tortured. For example, the 1st of November, I mentioned that I went through torture. And one of the questions was, we know you are a puppet of the West. We know you are leading a regime change agenda and you are being supported by the United States of America. And I look at myself waking up each day as a young activist and ask myself, how much really have I gotten from the United States of America? And it's nothing. What fuels my zeal is to see a better world. And I think with the same energy for us to attain a better society, this is a mindset that should be with each and every individual who walks on earth. Because politics evolves around the two concepts of conflict and cooperation. Nothing guarantees that one stable state will be perpetually stable. Once there is conflict in the United States of America, solidarity will be sought from elsewhere. But once we normalize that we are going to stand with those who are oppressed or who are in the zones of conflict, we make the world a better place to be. That's my submission.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of our panelists for sharing so much. We want to stop speaking for a little bit, and we want to turn it over to you all for any questions that you might have for any of our panelists. I think we've got a gentleman in the back there, and then down there.
Hello. Okay. First off, I just want to thank each and every one of you for coming out here. The incredible personal risk that you've taken on your shoulders, it is remarkable, truly. I have more of a comment than a question, but I just wanted to share this with you. So, I'm a Christian, and what I see happening in the United States is exactly what the New Testament has been warning people about for 2,000 years. In fact, as I was listening to you speak, I was reading in the 1 Thessalonians 5 where Paul talks about being sober and awake and not complacent, as you said, because he said while people are screaming about peace and security, that's when destruction comes upon them, exactly as you guys were talking about now, how fast it descends upon you and how in our complacency we'll tolerate madness. And he says, and when that day comes, there will be no escape. I do. And so I just want to say that I'm going to say what I really feel like this is about, and that Trump represents the very darkest in the American spirit.
Did you have a question?
I just wanted to share that with you. And say
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here.
Okay, I've got two very brief questions. The first one is for Sunny. Was wondering if you could say something, if you know about it. What is the situation in Macau? As you know, that was returned to Portugal 2 years after Hong Kong went back to China, but you don't hear much about what's going on there. Are they suffering a parallel situation to what's going on in Hong Kong? Then I have a very brief question about Zimbabwe, or specifically it's about somebody that's been hiding out there the old Egyptian dictator Haile Mengistu Mariam fled to Zimbabwe and was given exile by Mugabe back in the 70s. Is Mengistu Mariam still in Zimbabwe, and is there any pressure to return him to Ethiopia so he can face justice there? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I didn't see this coming about Macau question, but that's a good question. I mean, because yes, so for Hong Kong and Macau, we both are so-called protected by the one country, two system framework. And after the Portuguese hand over Macau to China in 1999, 2 years after Hong Kong handover, Macau unfortunately was immediately being absorbed and assimilated into a mainland Chinese city after that. Because Macau is different in a way that they don't rely on financial industry, and Hong Kong rely on financial industry. That's why that is where the whole legal system and Western common law system come into place, right? If you want to be a successful financial hub, and then you need to have good lawyer, transparent and credible legal system to ensure the interests of business and entrepreneurs. That's why international businesses would come to Hong Kong to do businesses. But in Macau, they are famous of casino. They are being named the Eastern Las Vegas, Asian Las Vegas, right? And then the whole industry demographic is different, and people there, they don't even really try to ask for a universal suffrage, unlike Hong Kong. So it's very different. The context is different, and they are really pleased to become part of the mainland China. And then the Beijing government also use a lot of policy to assimilate the people there to ensure that people would conform to the central government. But yeah.
Thank you. I think in response to your question, I did mention that there is the so-called new dispensation in Zimbabwe, but it then became a new desperation. That alone speaks to how the dictator you mentioned has been living freely there, and there's no pressure that has been given through by the current regime. Dictators, like we've mentioned, give shelter to each other. And if we do not, as the oppressed, stand side to side to reaffirm collectively and contumaciously our power, then we are never going to realize a free society. Dictators will always shield each other, shelter each other, and support each other.
Other questions?
Well, thank you so much for coming here and inspiring us. My question is for Dr. Maria. Just like, I know you talked about the trauma. It is so hard. I live in and the Pakistan side that share the border with Afghanistan. So when you talked about that, you always have this trauma, and it's super hard to forget. Can you elaborate more over if you have here from someone any advices or how to work with these kind of folks and what to talk to them and how to work with them? Because just one day I asked the same question from someone in Geneva, Switzerland, and then I was like, when you talk, it is so easy to talk, but when it comes to the reality and those people are really facing, and when you tell them that, hey, everything will be okay and you do not have a real solution, what do you tell them? And then that guy just cried and told me, I don't know. So what is your advice on that case?
Thank you. I also wanted to say, I don't know. But we have an approach where in my work, I do not work without the mental health support specialist within my programs, because it's really crucial. I'm not a psychotherapist, I'm not a psychologist, and people are traumatized. Specific instruments that we are using, especially when having a dialogues or having a very tough conversation about what it feels to be in a wartime, what it feels to lose your loved ones, what it feels when your loved ones are fighting and you don't know whether they're going to come back or not, then we do have specialists working with us. So I would say those conversations should be approached very carefully. In our work, we use do no harm approach, and sometimes perhaps it's even a better way to step outside and not have a conversation if you know that it's gonna hurt a person or not. But then on the other hand, it's of course a hope. We humans are very hopeful. We do believe that it's gonna change for better, especially in situation right now like Afghanistan, and my heart just cries for Afghanistan, for people there, for females there who have no rights. But I feel like we need to have those conversations. Just be mindful in how we having them.
Other questions?
Thanks for coming here. It's very interesting to hear your perspectives, and I think it's very courageous what you're all doing. I guess my question is maybe a bit broader or different, but are there other countries that are more receptive to your question or your, experiences than the United States?
I think I can probably give a short answer to that. For example, right now I'm based in Austria, Vienna, and it's quite open sometimes to listen and like to have a conversation with you. But the question is always after that is the action that is being taken towards it. Is it being taken or not? And I've had so many attempts like about having meetings and conversations like what's going on, what's happening, yada yada. But like there were no actions taken. So I think I found like pretty much the U.S. is the most responsive so far for the, let's say, the countries or like the places that I've been to on a personal level. I would say that.
I'm based right now in Germany, and I was a refugee in Germany till March this year when I switched to a work contract. And I have gone through all the feelings and emotions that any type of refugee goes through a denial and fighting against the system and fighting with the people. And I would say in my experiences, what I have seen, that people who have gone through something similar, they are much more receptive to the experiences that we go through. And when we have this type of conversations, quite often the countries who had also this trauma and PTSD experience, such as Poland in the Second World War, or Baltic states, or Bosnia and Herzegovina, they do understand what people are feeling and emotions they're experiencing. But I feel like in the United States, being on the brink of something big, the change that is coming, people are also understanding way better how it feels to be in uncertainty, because uncertainty is really scary and no one wants to be there. So that would be my answer to this question. Hope I answered it.
Is this their last question?
Yes.
Yeah, I had another question for Sunny. I was wondering if you could say something about the social credit system and to what extent has China been able to implement that so far in Hong Kong? Thanks.
That's a very good question. I don't think China has now massively deployed the social credit system nationwide speaking. That doesn't happen in Hong Kong either, because I think they're still in a very early experimental phase and trying to develop the system more than really can apply that at scale. However, I would say the digital surveillance is very real in China. Speaking of, so this is also like a dilemma or double-edged sword. I mean, in the 21st century, right? Many people talk about trying to make a digital transition, trying to use or try to integrate more technology into the governance, into the government operation. But at the same time, in the case of China, they digitalize everything. And in the case that you don't have to pay cash, everything is e-payment, and then you don't have to, it's so convenient in a way that you start to wonder, so how would they process the data, right? So actually, the government can keep track on your personal spending behavior, and there's no data privacy law in China, and the government is notorious for getting access to all the data tech giant companies. They have the back door for that. So in the case of China, I would say the digital surveillance is real, and the world should be really trying to monitor the situation, because China is also exporting the digital surveillance model to the global south, to Africa, and help other autocrats to build their digital surveillance system to monitor their national and the behaviors of the opposition. Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much for those really important questions. I first want to thank Alex, Ruth, Eric for partnering with the McCain Institute and bringing this group here to Madison. And tomorrow night we'll be at UW Milwaukee for what I think was a really important conversation to have. I want to thank all of you who joined the live stream and also joined us here in person. I hope that you are able to walk away feeling a little bit more inspired and hopeful that folks like Takudzwa, Maria, Hajar, and Sunny are working so diligently at great personal risk to defend democracy and human rights. And I hope that, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, that you'll reflect on the role that you play here in the United States, and that in a week from now, you exercise your right to vote. And if you're undecided, you do your research. No matter who you vote for, you're just an informed voter. And I think one thing that we learned here tonight is that right to vote, that right to participate in a free and democratic society is far from guaranteed. So I really hope that you leave here knowing that your voice matters and your vote matters. I want to thank each of these folks. They traveled thousands of miles to be here tonight and share their stories. And they're really special people. And I know that the McCain Institute is very lucky and grateful that each of you are a part of our global network. So thank you all so much. We really appreciate your time this evening.